Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about Everest Forge. I've got a couple examples from Everest Forge that were provided by the folks at Swordis. Now, I'm going to link them in the description down below if you're interested. That's where they'll be. Do know that these were review samples provided by the folks at Swordis. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start. And I should also know that this review is going to be something a little different and that it's less of a review and more of a observations on things that are common between these swords. Now, I don't know a lot about the Kopis or the Xiphos, which are two examples that were sent to me, but I can evaluate them, show you some close-ups of bits and bobs and fits and features. So if you see something at Everest Forge, these swords or other examples from them, you have some idea of generally how well they make swords and some of the things that they commonly do or don't do, and hopefully that helps you better spend your money. I do know both of these examples are about 250 bucks on the Swordis website. If you're wondering about the budget, that's where they are. And that puts them kind of in the entry-level price point for swords in a category of swords that isn't super well represented. There are other people that make Xiphos or Kopis swords, but they're not super common, and they're not as prolific as long swords or katanas. So even though you can get a really compelling katana on the market for 250 bucks, you're less likely to get as much for a Xiphos in the same price category. But anyway, I'm going to talk about the price if I think it's worth it towards the end. For the moment, though, I'm going to go over bits and bobs and fits and features. So the first thing to note about this Kopis here is that it comes with a scabbard. The scabbard has a little nubbin at the end. It has some detailing. I would note as well that the leather feels of a better quality than I typically feel on Chinese-made swords. A lot of the leather that I feel on scabbards and stuff out of China tends to feel thin or like it's going to degrade more quickly. This feels like, well, like leather that you would find on a belt or something like that. It's not the highest quality leather, but it feels stronger, a little bit more structurally sound for swords and scabbards and stuff than I typically feel in swords at this price point. It looks like it's stitched and cut and glued along the back, and then there's some rivets placed for this belt loop. The sword scabbard will fall out, but a little quick tug will pull it out, and it seems to hold reasonably well on the belt. This belt loop, incidentally, gives me the impression that it will actually hold up and not degrade very quick, so that's something worth noting. The blade is the other bit to note. Now, before I get to actually to the blade, I will talk a little bit about the grip. We have wood scales with pins in them, and these pins are kind of cleaned up in such a way where I don't feel any ledges or anything. The wood has been polished in such a way that it's pretty slick to the hand, so if I hold it and try to twist the sword, even if I really hold down tight, I can move it around in my hand. What that means is if I start going and chopping with this thing and I have some bad angles, it's prone to turning in my hand, is what I found that little test will do. It's not to say it's going to turn all the time, but if I really throw it out there with a lot of force and I meet it into a log and the blade doesn't bite, it's probably going to turn in my hand rather than preserve that angle of the strike. The other bit to note is that there is resin around the scales kind of filled in to occupy some of the gaps. It makes it look better, but I do notice that's the case. And there's also some tool marks here and there that look like they could have been finished a little better, but it's not necessarily too bad. I should also call out, so I don't have to do it every 5 seconds, that there is a handmade aesthetic going on here, something crude, rough, something asymmetrical is what I'll say. And I don't want to harp on it every 5 seconds, but note that every inch of this has a tool mark or an asymmetry or something like that. It's not necessarily grotesque, it's not terrible to the eye, but it is there on close inspection. If you're the kind of person that likes machine-made perfection, or the kind of person that likes that kind of human eye, the human aesthetic to it, this leans towards that. It's not to say that either one of those camps are bad. It's certainly a personal preference thing. This has, every inch of it has some indication that there was a person with a hand tool making it. Some people are going to love that, other people won't, but I am calling out that it's present here. The guard is glossed over. I don't notice any hot spots. Getting onto the blade, it's a big old kukri shape. It has what look like kind of hand ground in fullers. I can see that they terminate in some odd spots. I can make out a lot of tool marks in there as well, but they seem relatively even, reasonably well placed. The bevel as well looks like it's almost done with an angle grinder, and if that's the case, then props to them. They are surgeons with an angle grinder if that's what they're doing. The lines look relatively clean. They don't wander a whole lot. The edges and bevels are all reasonably well done. What I don't see, though, is distal taper. This sword is pretty much a consistent thickness all the way through, much like maybe like a kukri would be, even though those tend to have a little bit of taper. That makes this almost unwieldably large. It is a big knife, and if you want something brutish and strong in the cut, something to split wood with, this might be a viable option. But as a sword, I feel like I don't have a lot of tip control. It's hard to start, hard to stop. It's a bit of a risk killer, and the grip is a little bit too large for me. And it also kind of twists. Those combinations of heft and lack of dynamics, or the dynamics it has anyway, don't make me feel super secure in terms of moving this around. So I did cut with it, and I didn't have problems doing water bottles and stuff, but if I was cutting harder targets, I'd be a little bit more leery about it. As it is, it cut through the targets that had a good edge. It did the things that it was supposed to do, it was hefty moving it around. The next one to talk about is the Xiphos, and again we have the little loop at the end, a similar quality of leather. It's secured in a similar way. We have a different apparatus to secure this to a belt this time, but it's welcome. I think the adornments of leather and how they fixed it look nice. There's been some effort to get this to recede into the guard correctly, and the scabbard doesn't immediately let go, but a quick pull will deploy the weapon. On the hilt, this time we have a peen over here, and I can make out some tool markings, and I can get a finger under it, but it's been polished. Again, lots of hand sanding, hand marks, kind of tool marks and stuff. It's been cleaned up, but it's not as pristine as it could be. As we move down to the scales, this little edge here looks like it's got a fair bit of power tool markings in it, but none of them hurt my hand. So there's no hot spots or anything like that. It's just not as finished as it could be. If I wanted to, I could take a piece of sandpaper and refine it or do something else to it. This time, the pins I can feel rise a little bit more, but again, nothing creating a hot spot. And again, the grip feels too big. It feels like it's honestly made with somebody with larger, in mind for somebody with larger hands than me, or it's made by somebody with small hands for people with large hands, but nobody with large hands to test the sword. I have pretty big sausage hands over here, and so it's rare that the grip is too big for me. I can hang on to it, but it doesn't feel super comfortable. The swell over here fills the palm of my hand. At the same time, if I throw it out there, it just feels a little too big, almost like it's going to break my grip. And again, if I even hold onto it really tight, I can still turn this in my hand. So it gives me the impression that, again, if I'm moving it around at pace, I might lose my grip, or it might twist in my hand a little bit. So I think, again, I could resolve this, a little bit of sanding, and potentially for the price, I'm not even opposed to it. I would rather not, but it's a little too big for me. It's easy enough to subtract stuff. Easy enough isn't the right word. Possible. Adding it, though, is impossible. So just know that both of these grips have teetered on the too large side. Again, with the grip scales, I spot kind of resin or something like that filling in the gaps. I spot areas where things could have been a little bit more refined. I spot tool marks. But overall, I didn't feel any issues with hot spots or ergonomics and moving them around, apart from them being a little bit on the large side. And again, here in the blade profile, I see what looks like bevels put in with an angle grinder, but surgically so. There are minimal rippling, the lines don't wander too much. If they are using an angle grinder, tip of my hat for an even hand in making them. And again, I don't see any distal taper. So this one feels a little bit more nimble. Perhaps the Xiphos doesn't have a lot of distal taper in its historic shape. It's got obviously this leaf pattern blade. I haven't held many of them, but I don't know how much distal taper plays into this sword historically. I would say this one moves around, but it still moves around in a way where I don't feel like I have a ton of thrust control. I feel like I have a lot of authority in the chop, but the grip is impeding me a little bit from feeling super secure with it. That said, both of them did cut reasonably well. I took them out, cut some water bottles and things like that with them. The edge held up well. Both of them would not bend if I did slight slaps on my stand, but if I hit them hard, they will bend, and then a hard smack on the other side will bend them back. They're rather loath to. I have to hit pretty hard to get them to bend. And I haven't done really any other testing from there, mostly because if I chop into branches and stuff like that, it's gonna hurt my hand and it's gonna be kind of slippery. So that's where I called it. But at the same time, if you enjoy swords like this, I'm confident that they're gonna hold up reasonably well, so long as you're cutting into soft, medium targets like wood and things like that. Probably gonna handle logs or branches and stuff like that actually reasonably well. I believe they're made at a 5160. The heat treatment on them doesn't seem to be amazing. At the same time, it holds an edge reasonably well, at least the basic cutting that I've done. Now, the next question to answer is, do I personally think these are worth it at $250? And the short answer here is, for me, no. I do think they are worth it to some folks, though, because there are different strokes for different folks. To me, I don't really want to take a file out and adjust the grip out of the box, so I want something that feels a little bit more secure in my hand. This one is a little bit too much. It's possible to take it away. At the same time, I don't think I would be compelled to do it. And I like swords that feel just generally a little bit more lively in my hand. This feels like a big knife, and I think that, I'm guessing anyway, that the folks at Everest Forge make a really mean kukri, because some of the way these are executed is great in a kukri, but doesn't feel great in a small sword. So these feel like big knives as opposed to small swords, and that is a nuance that I've seen knife makers in the past struggle with. At the same time, there are people who like big knives, right? There are people who like a sword with a lot of authority in the cut, or that have a big hand, or that don't mind doing a little bit of tweaking to get the sword exactly where they want. And coming out of the gate with this sword that is as clean and nice as it is going to be quite a deal for some folks. For me, there's a little bit too much out of the gate to deal with to make it the way I want. But I would be encouraged, though. I think the folks at Everest Forge show some competence here. This is a generally well-made thing that is only a few tweaks off from me really liking it. Having a little thinner grip and having a blade that incorporates some level of distal taper would be a sword that I think would move quite well in the hand. And I don't know if either of these are the appropriate sword to incorporate those on, but if they're capable of doing it, it wouldn't make me pause from buying future swords from Everest Forge if those are features I can get in some of their products. Anyway, as it is, the complaints I'd have would be a little too thick here and a little more of a chunky blade that lends itself to being more authoritative in the cut. If you like those things, I think you're going to like most of what Everest Forge has to offer. If you don't, then be warned, there may be some work to do, or maybe these just aren't for you. Now, what I have here is an example from Landsknecht Emporium, and it's not fair, this is a more expensive sword, but Landsknecht Emporium has a few messers that start around the 300 euro mark, which isn't terribly far away from what you're paying for one of the guys from Everest Forge. What you have here is just a different approach in sword making, and granted, a messer is not the same as a Xiphos or a Kopis, but it demonstrates the point I'm trying to make, in that these swords feel like weapons. They have a similar kind of human aesthetic to it, but all of the messers that I felt from Landsknecht Emporium feel nimble and agile. They feel like I could do sword things with them. They feel like small swords, not like big knives. And I would love to see a little bit more of the dynamics that I'm seeing in the messers from Landsknecht Emporium brought into the folks at Everest Forge, because it's absolutely possible to have maybe a little bit more human looking aesthetic, a little bit cruder looking aesthetic, and still have an absolutely adoring fan base. The folks at Landsknecht Emporium have attracted a lot of folks that really like the feel of their swords, myself included, and I'd love to see Everest Forge be another contender, another provider of swords that feel amazing in the hand. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I do want to offer a special thanks to the folks at Sordes for sending them my way. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you have any questions, throw them in the commentary. I will try to answer. Otherwise, again, links are in the description down below. That's all I've got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.